Welcome to the Love Mondays podcast. My goal is to bring inspiring and authentic guests on the show who can help everyone love their Mondays and every other day of the week. To be truly excited and intentional every single day. My guest today is Al Hamarian. Al's journey is very inspiring. He was deeply committed to his career in talent acquisition and HR. Success in the corporate world came naturally, but in the process, he, like many of us, deprioritized his own health and well-being. That all changed after a milestone birthday trip to Mykonos, a trip that became a catalyst for a massive personal transformation. Over the next 365 days, Al lost 80 pounds, not just transforming physically, but completely reshaping his mindset, habits, identity, and approach to life. Now he is sharing his journey with the world, inspiring others to take charge of their transformations. He's building a community focused on empowerment, self-care, and the belief that lasting change is possible, even when life feels overwhelmingly busy. Al, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Ron. It's great to be here. Appreciate it.
Fantastic. So my first question is all about how do you help those who don't love their Mondays every other day? What are some tangible steps that folks can take to find more joy and fulfillment?
That's a great question, Ron. How do you love your Mondays? I think in terms of, reflecting on my journey, my time with many, many Mondays in the corporate world, a couple of things really stand out for me personally. I think happiness is a big one. I think that if you make decisions that make you happy every day, you'll feel very fulfilled. You'll live a happy life. And if you're not making decisions that make you happy every single day, you need to take a look at how you're living your life. Look, that's very simplistic, but it's very difficult to do. I get people can't just drop everything and change their lives. However, they certainly can take steps to ensure that they prioritize themselves. And ultimately, that's the key. Prioritize yourself, make yourself live your best life. That way, you could show up in your best version of yourself for your friends, your family, your work. And when you're living a happy, authentic life, every day is great. There is no dreading Mondays. There's no hump day Wednesday. Every day is awesome. That's the key. That is the key that to be honest, that I found. If you're living a happy life, true happiness, not surface level happy, not going to, that whatever store and buying that designer label. That's camouflage happy, I like to call it, but true happiness where you're fulfilled.
I love that. And so as I think about those intentional decisions every day, can you give me a couple of examples of, what you call Al 2.0, who's much happier? What are a couple of things you do every day to live intentionally?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I'll start with what I did last year. How about that? That really was a bit of a catalyst for change for me. It's really recognizing the things that do make you happy and your actions aligning to those things. For instance, I'm a summer person. And so I struggle in the wintertime, the cold, the aches, the pains, the lack of sun. And so recognizing that last year, I made the decision to work remotely. My employer thankfully enabled this, so I'm very grateful. It's somewhere warm, in a warm climate for the month of February. And that decision was for me. And that decision was for my well-being and my happiness. And guess what? It was amazing. And everyone around me benefited because I was happier, I was healthier, I was more present, and it made a world of difference. Was it ideal from, personal perspective in terms of being present for friends and family? Physically, maybe not, but it was the right decision for me. And that transcended into, how I showed up every day. That's a real life tangible example of what you can do and the decisions that you can make to be able to empower yourself to drive that happiness.
Yeah, I love that example because you said, look, I know myself, I'm not a winter person. And you took it into your own hands to say, look, 1 month in that in that dreary period, so to speak, for you, you decided to be happy. And by doing that, and look, I love how you connected to the ripple effect to all the people around you, is that your happiness probably cascaded to folks around you. So, seemingly
Yeah.
what you called a bit, thinking of yourself actually probably helped a lot of other people along the way.
Absolutely. People have this misconception that if you're prioritizing yourself and making decisions that make you happy, you're being selfish. It's not selfish, it's self care. And so when you're prioritizing yourself and when you are investing in that self care, that's when you're really showing up, the best version of yourself for people around you. So you can't support people effectively if you're not your best self every day. And so that's where I kind of sort of shift the narrative to say it's not really selfish, it's self-care. It's all how you
Love
look
it.
at it.
Love it. Okay. I'd love you to run us through that, the early part of your journey, right? You talked about being very successful in corporate, but in the process, losing yourself. So tell us about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, my story isn't unique. As I'm speaking to people and engaging with people right now, I hear this very often. People are dedicate themselves to their career, their families, their home life. They put in their 9 to 5 or 9 to 8. Sometimes you put in extra hours, and they they go through the grind, and they do this day in and day out. And eventually that catches up. And that's exactly what happened to me. For 10 years, I was chasing the stuff, the promotions, and I'm grateful for everything. But it came at a cost. And so with that grind, I ballooned to over 300 pounds. And 10 years literally flew by at a blink of an eye. And, you at one point look in the mirror and you no longer identify with the person looking back at you. And that's not a great feeling, right? And so I was like many people, prioritizing others and prioritizing work and deprioritizing myself. Fast forward 10 years, 100 pounds later, 300 pounds, and a very unhealthy me had a fantastic milestone birthday.
Amazing. Yeah. And tell me about what led to that milestone birthday. Was there something in you that said something has to change, or did it just ensue out of it?
It just ensued out of it. Honestly, Ron, sometimes change comes in the strangest places, the strangest times. I was literally expecting to have a fantastic milestone birthday for 2 weeks on that, what I call the magical island of Mykonos. And that's what happened. But I got so much more out of it. It was on that island that really a light bulb, went off in my brain. I was out of my everyday environment, and I was surrounded by people with a very different mindset. And that really marinated with me. And that really made me look at everything objectively and really look at how I was living my life and really look at some hard truths. To be honest, it was on that island that I realized I was eating out of loneliness. I had turned to food to sort of fill that void. And so how ironic, I always say, how ironic is that? I was a recruiter. I was managing large teams. I was surrounded by people. I joke now and I tell people I was the lonely recruiter. I'm just gonna
Mm.
take that in for a second. And so, you have to be in a place of acceptance. And so on that island, everything aligned for me. I realized, what my life had turned into. I was open, and I was honest with myself. And leaving that island, I knew that I had to make a number of changes to my life and start prioritizing myself and my happiness. I was happy for 2 full weeks, truly, truly happy. I lost 17 pounds on that island, not dieting, not exercising, just eating healthy, like just eating normal and just moving. I mean, you're constantly swimming, walking, exploring. 17 pounds by not doing anything. And that was a bit of an eye opener for me.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. So that sounds like a phenomenal trip that just helped reignite you and helped you prioritize. So what did you do when you came back? Because that we all have these great vacations and we have all these big ideas. And then you go back to that first Monday and you're inundated with email and all the other priorities.
Yeah.
How is this different for you?
That's actually a great question. And to be honest, it's not until now that I'm truly figuring out what was so different. So the biggest difference when I came back, I had all this awareness, which is great. But if you don't have a sense of motivation, doesn't matter what I mean, ultimately we all know what we have to do. But if you don't have that sense of motivation, it's all gonna, fall flat. And so I'm just realizing being truly happy on that island lit up my dopamine levels, literally like a Christmas tree. And dopamine is linked to your sense of motivation. And that's why when I came back, I had this insane sense of motivation, this drive, and just this will to change and succeed. That's why happy people are achieving goals, they're achieving dreams, they're making it happen. And so that's why when people ask me, what did you do? What was one of the first things you did when you came back? And I tell people, prioritize myself and made decisions that made me happy. Again, so simplistic, but it made the world of difference. That was my starting point, literally. Because again, if you don't have that sense of motivation, it doesn't matter. You can hire all the trainers in the world. You can hire the nutritionist. They can tell you what to do, but if you don't have that motivation, you're not going to do it. I know this because I was caught up in that loop for 10 years. So from my experience, being happy makes such a big difference. And now, of course, that was, one element. I think diet and exercise, of course, comes into play. But you have to look at your environment, right? Your environment plays a big key in your ability to be able to achieve those types of goals. And when I say environment specifically, I call it the double P's. People in place. Look at who you're surrounding yourself with. Are they motivating you? Are they positive? Do they help you drive to sort of, to make your goals happen? And then, of course, your physical environment. If I realized, my physical environment was a little chaotic, not the best. And so, when I came home, I made some changes to my physical environment. And then, of course, the fact that for me personally, that awakening of being, eating out of loneliness, and that realization that happened in Mykonos, that was guiding me in everything. So I knew that was a trigger. And so I consciously made an effort to not be lonely, right? And so to find, companionship and, to be able to ensure that I don't go back to that place of loneliness. And Ron, it's hard to do. I think it's just become that much worse after COVID. I'm not the only one. Loneliness is an epidemic and people don't realize. So for me specifically in my situation, that was something that I was very aware of from that trip. And so I knew I needed to make that change and that conscious effort to ensure that again I don't go back to that place in my life. And then stress. I was on that island for 2 weeks. It was stress free. When I came back, this became quite clear how stress was affecting my mental health, my weight loss, and I made some difficult decisions. I had some difficult conversations with family. Sometimes our biggest stressors are the ones closest to us in the form of family, right? And so, I had to have some of those difficult conversations to create boundaries. And when you really communicate, guess what? People get it. We in our minds we make it bigger than it needs to be. And I had those conversations, and I was so nervous about how it was going to go. But guess what? When you're open and when you approach it with an openness and honesty and transparency, people receive it and they understand. And that was big for me. And that was really a huge thing for me. And then there's a number of other things that eventually came into play that again, people don't really talk about when it comes to significant weight loss specifically. People don't talk about hormones. People don't talk about how important it is to get your hormones checked. My doctors never recommended, having me check my hormones. And that could be an issue, right? specifically if you're male, if you're a certain age, your testosterone levels, becoming lower, your cortisol levels becoming too high, and that affects your belly fat. And then your estrogen levels are off balance and they're too high. And so there's a whole whack of issues, hormonal issues that, people need to be aware of also if they're struggling.
Yeah, it sounds like you had like a real eye-opening experience there. You had a phenomenal 2 weeks of happiness. So you realized stress was hurting you. And then I'd love to bring it back to, okay, so Al 2.0 comes back to Toronto. It might be cold, might be the winter, I don't know. But what are some things you did in your daily routine to maintain that or to develop or that happiness that you talked about, as well as not let yourself slip into that, thing that we've always slipped back into, right? So what are some daily things folks can do?
That's a great question, Ron. I think one of the biggest things, find your motivation. If you don't have that motivation, that deep, deep motivation, it's going to be difficult to get that discipline to get you to do all the things you need to do physically. For example, the gym, meal preps, all that kind of fun stuff. And so for me specifically, because I found my motivation, and everyone's motivation is very different. What I've realized is motivation is very personalized and very individualized. What may motivate me and what my deep motivation is could not really matter to you, and vice versa, right? And so I think the biggest takeaway is find your motivation, and that's really difficult to do because there's surface motivation, but then there's true motivation. Because once you have that motivation, when you do go to the gym, early in the morning, it's not easy. It's difficult to do, but your motivation gets you through those difficult times. So coming back, one of the things I did realize, because I had the motivation, I lacked the knowledge. And so, meaning I was intimidated to go to the gym. I didn't really know what to eat. And so I invested in some resources. So I hired a personal trainer who actually helped me with my diet and exercise. And people say, well, what if I don't have the money? Guess what? We live in a day and age where there's a thing called YouTube, and there's a lot of free resources. We're very lucky, right? Compared to like 20 years ago, that may not have been the case. And so if you can't afford to invest in those resources, go online, educate yourself. That's key. So I knew I needed to educate myself. And also, for me, accountability was a big thing. So I knew I had obviously a hard time keeping myself accountable, and hiring a trainer would give me the resource and the knowledge, but he would hold me accountable. And that was key for me. So hiring a trainer worked for me. He told me what to do, and I did it verbatim. People think you need to do all this cardio, all this crazy weight training, which when you're starting, any kind of resistance training is a plus. And all you need to do is get your steps in. For the first 6 months, the only form of cardio that I did was I just walked. I walked on the treadmill. My trainer said on day one, I just need you to hit 20,000 steps a day. And I'm like, okay, I can do that. That's in my control. And so I literally hit 20,000 steps every day. And once you do that for, a few weeks, you start seeing the weight come off. And I didn't think it would happen. Like, I'm going to lose weight by just walking. And it did. It worked. And so trust in the process, trust in those resources, and listen and be accountable.
Do you still have a personal trainer?
No. So I haven't had a personal trainer for about 6-ish months. 6-ish months, yeah.
And how do you replace that accountability piece? Do you feel like it's just a locked-in habit now, or how do you?
It's locked-in habit. Yeah, absolutely. So you get to a point where you when you start, you're treating the gym almost like medicine. It's medicine for your heart. It's medicine for your body. But then there's a shift that happens. Discipline kicks in. You also see results, and that fuels your motivation even more. And then discipline kicks in, and then it's like this trigger happens in your brain where it becomes a habit. And then B, it almost becomes a place of calm. I go to the gym to be calm now, and it's self-care, right? That's what it boils down to.
Yeah.
And I think that once you get to that place, look, it doesn't happen overnight. It takes a long time, but if you trust in the process, you will get to that point, and then you that accountability just you're just accountable because it becomes habit, right? So
Yeah, it's interesting in terms of motivation and as well as willpower, right? Like I find myself generally during the day, I'm pretty good with nutrition. In the night, my willpower is lower. Often eating chips and things like that. Any secrets or any ways to say, hey, how do people kind of avoid those traps? I know I fall into a lot of those traps.
yeah, get out of your environment because it's staying in your environment that you fall into the traps. And so for me, I got out of those old habits, and so I was a couch potato, and and that's when those habits would sneak in for me. And what I found helpful was getting myself out of that environment. So get up off the couch, stop watching TV, and literally get yourself out of the environment. Go for a walk. And so I replaced my couch time with like walks, um,
Amazing.
outside, literally, and it made a big difference.
Yeah, amazing. It's funny. I just read the Blue Zones book where they looked at the six populations around the world where folks live to triple digits and are relatively healthy physically and mentally. And one of the things that cut across all of them was walking. And as simple as that sounds, it's one of the best parts of my day where I listen to an audiobook or a YouTube video as you talked about, walk the dog,
Right.
and you're moving, you're thinking, you're off the couch, it's such a positive habit. And as you said, it's not anything revolutionary, but it's just getting into that daily habit, right?
It's getting to the daily habit. It's self-awareness too, right? You have to be self-aware enough to know those triggers and those habits. So for me, I was fortunate that I was pretty self-aware. So I knew staying on the couch, being in front of the TV was triggering those bad habits. Just like I knew being here in the wintertime, it was triggering certain habits also. Hibernating in the dead of winter, not going out for a walk, not being active. And so every year I would go through winter like 15 pounds heavier. And then you work to kind of get that 15 pounds off, and then you're back into winter again. And so it's a vicious cycle, right?
Yeah. And I love how you said you took that month and you kind of were very intentional to say, look, I'm going to get out of that environment. I'm probably going to walk more. I'm going to be much more active in a warmer climate. And it all kind of fuels your renewed sense of motivation. I absolutely love it. So what's the next chapter for you like? I mean, I love this message that you're spreading. How are you doing that with your world, so to speak?
Thanks, Ron. So people can go to my Instagram. I'm sharing everything on Instagram. Honestly, right now, it's about building a community to be able to help. I'm realizing now just how unhappy I was. And when you're that unhappy and when you have that amount of weight to lose, it just feels like you are in a hole and you can't dig yourself out, truly. And so now I want to help people. If I can help people change their lives, if I can help one person out of that hole, I feel like I've made an impact. And that's what I'm doing, honestly. I'm sharing everything on Instagram as transparently as I can to be able to help people because the struggle is real. I was very conscious in my approach to my transformation. I didn't want to go down the Ozempic route. I didn't want to do any of that. And so for me, it was all about the mind, like changing my mindset and doing the hard work. And I kept the weight off, thankfully.
Amazing. Amazing. Well, congratulations on that journey. Anything else you want to share with my listeners?
I think the big takeaway is find your happy, make decisions that make you happy, and just realize if you are embarking on any kind of transformation journey, whether it be your lifestyle, whether it be your physicality, just know it's not a linear journey. It's going to be curvy, it's going to have ups, it's going to have downs. Just ride it out because if you trust the process, when you get to the other side, it's really rewarding. Because I was one of those people that, I struggled, Ron. I struggled with traveling. All the things that people take for granted. Airline seats. Having to ask for a seatbelt extender when traveling. Going to the beach in the summertime. People in their bathing suits, and here you're self-conscious and you're covering up. And so, for me, that all fueled my motivation to be able to get to a better place. It's not easy. It won't be easy. But if it was easy, guess what? we'd all be walking around like supermodels and bodybuilders, right?
Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Al. I congratulate you on
Thank you.
2.0 and really taking control of your happiness and life. And I look forward to learning from you in the future.
Thank you, Ron. I really appreciate it. Much appreciated.